Welcome to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast. I'm your keynote, TED Talk and story coach, Doug Stevenson. In this podcast series, I'm going to share with you some simple and practical storytelling techniques and hacks that'll make you stand out from the competition so that you can get paid to speak, or to give a TED Talk that goes viral, or to simply tell your story in a way that makes a difference in the world. You'll learn how to choose, craft, and deliver stories that stick. Personal stories from your amazing life, business stories, leadership and sales stories, stories that are marketable and memorable, stories that sell you and your product or service. My job as your virtual keynote and story coach is to help you design and deliver stories and speeches that get people to do what you want them to do, or to consider a new perspective. If you're serious about using storytelling to advance your career, to get paid to speak, or simply to get your message across in a more engaging and compelling manner, this podcast is for you. All right, well, let's get started. This podcast and this series specifically that I'm interviewing you for today is about how to become a professional speaker. So before you got into professional speaking, Jim, what were you doing? And what was that transition into professional speaking? What did that look like?
Before I was a professional speaker, I was an environmental geologist, cleaning up oil spills and gasoline spills all over the country and a little bit overseas. And I did a lot of technical training as part of that work, sharing data and knowledge with other scientists and environmental lawyers. And I did that for 15 years. I got pretty good at training, but it was always about sharing data. And then at one of those science conferences, I gave a short presentation on my mountain climbing that I do. And a number of my peers said to me, Jim, that was fantastic stuff. I'd love to hear more about your climbing stories. You should do that instead of being a scientist. And I was hurt. I thought you guys liked me as a scientist. I thought you were good. They're like, yeah, you're fine, but you should do this storytelling thing. And I just stood there with my mouth hanging open, thinking, what does that mean? And that was the first light bulb that came on to get me think, maybe I should stop being a scientist and start sharing my stories and lessons from climbing. And that's what led to today.
So who did you give those first presentations to, and were they for free or were you getting paid?
Well, my old science training was part of my science work, so it was sort of part of my salary, but actually getting paid to step on stage? No, my first ones were free because I decided that I was intrigued by this keynote speaking experience. So I went to the audience that knew me. I went to other scientific conferences and my scientific peers and said, hey, can I do an end of the day talk about my mountain climbing and my adventures? And they were like, well, yeah, sure. So I was smart in that I went to audiences that already knew me as a technical trainer. So they were willing to take a small chance on me as a keynote speaker. And then finally, one of them said, well, yeah, you can come. We'll give you a free lunch. And I thought, I need to get paid as a keynote speaker. So I leaned on them and said, please don't give me a free lunch. What's the lunch worth? And she said, I don't know, 25 bucks. I said, fine, don't give me lunch. I'll take a $25 check. And boom, that was my first keynote paid speaking gig.
That was my first paid gig too, is 25 bucks. So it's possible to go from 25 bucks to, $10,000-$15,000 or whatever. So absolutely. How did you leverage that forward? What did you do? What were the steps that you took to start going, well, if I can get 25, I can get 50. If I can get 50, I can get 500. Where did you go? Did you start putting in proposals? Did you start networking with people? How did you move it forward into professional speaking?
Well, it was sort of two prongs. One was from a marketing standpoint, which is I had spoken at 200 science conferences, so I leaned on them at first because they already knew who I was. I think they liked and trusted me as a business person. And so they said, well, I didn't know you did this, Jim, but sure, I guess you're worth $100. We'll try it. So I did that for a little while, which was smart to get the ball rolling. But I soon figured out that that wasn't going to be very big database, very big population. So I had to expand. And so I started asking them words that I'd learned from more experienced speakers like you and other people at National Speakers Association. Hey, who do you know who might have a conference? And so I started marketing. It was very small. It was very jerky. It was not very smooth at first, but I started reaching out to other people putting on conferences and said, hey, this group over here just paid me $100. You ought to pay me $200. And it was a slow spiral over the course of, I was part-time speaker for about 3 years. And I was slowly spiraling upwards. I got up to $200. I got up to $500. Maybe I even got 10 jobs in 1 year. But I realized soon that I needed to up my game on the stage. I needed to up my game on my messaging. And I realized, sure, you can get $100 if you tell a decent story. But if you really want to be great on stage, you have to up your stage skills and your messaging. And so that's when I really started working on that content, which led to you and I meeting each other a short time later.
Okay, now tell us about the story that everybody said, "Oh my gosh, you've got to tell us about your climbing stories, your adventure stories," because you fit into the category of an adventure speaker. In the profession, there are people like you who are adventurers. You do crazy things like climb mountains and all kinds of things. Tell us about that story. Tell us a little bit about what is the genesis of the story that got you started.
Yeah, I'd been a climber for many years before I was a speaker, maybe about 20 years before I became a speaker. Had different expedition experiences around the world, but most importantly, I had survived a traumatic situation where my friend and I had climbed Mount Rainier in the state of Washington. My friend's name was Mike Price, and we've been climbing partners for a long time. And we succeeded on a difficult route. And sadly, on the way down the mountain, things changed. We were coming down and we were crossing a glacier, a big sheet of ice, and a snow bridge spanned across a big hidden crevasse, a crack in the ice. That snow bridge collapsed and dropped me and my partner Mike 80 feet inside of a glacier. And I barely survived that experience because my partner Mike had protected me with the rope. But sadly, my partner Mike did not survive that experience. And even though I gave him CPR, he passed away inside that crevasse. And I was devastated and traumatized and racked with survivor guilt and scared and all those things. I eventually climbed out of the crevasse and I felt that somehow I wanted to share the story and, more importantly, the things I had learned along the way. And that became a driving force for me, was to tell the story about the brave things my partner Mike had done, how I barely survived that situation, and what I'd learned from it. So I started out as an adventure speaker, and I probably stayed in that category for about 5 years because I shared that Mount Rainier survival story and other expeditions. But over time, the content became more important. And really, I see myself as a niche speaker now on the topic of resilience and change management. But that was a 15-year slow focusing of what my stories are and what content matter most to the audience.
Well, I think what you just said is really helpful to a lot of people, that you spoke for years, 200 conferences in the technical, in your area of expertise with your job. And then over 15 years, it evolved and evolved and evolved, because some people think, well, I want to be a professional speaker and I've got 6 months to make it pay off. And my experience is similar to your experience, that it took years. It took years to learn and grow and perfect and massage my messaging and to develop my stories. And as you're saying, you started out as an adventure speaker, but now you're a resilient speaker, because the story isn't just about climbing a mountain. It's about resilience. It's how do you respond? How do you have the resilience to keep going in the face of obstacles and traumas and challenges? So at this point in your speaking career, how many years have you been doing it now?
Full-time keynoting for 18 years, and then a couple of part-time years before that, before I made the leap to full-time.
And have you spoken all over the world?
Yes. I've spoken as a keynote speaker about 800 or 900 times in about 7 or 8 different countries, and I think in every state in the union, as far as I know.
Yeah, yeah. So you've had a really successful career, and it sustained you over the long term. So one of the things that I think is always interesting for people is this question of, well, how many speeches do you give a year?
Good question, a very wise question. For me, it comes out to about 40 presentations a year. What I found was 1 year I did 65, and I thought I was on a great roll. And at the end of the year, I was exhausted. I have a wife and 2 children. I was never home. I thought, this is too much. I can't do 60 talks a year and still keep my life, my family, and keep up my desired recreation, my mountain climbing. A few years I dipped as low as maybe as about 20. And then I found that I was a little lack of confidence. If I say, gosh, I haven't given this presentation in 2 months, I'm afraid I'm rusty. I don't remember what my second story is supposed to be. So I found out that I needed to speak at least 2 or 3 times a month to keep smooth and polished. So that kind of fell into that 30 to 45 for me. And that's pretty much where I've stayed for the last 12 years or so. And it's a different number for different people. But you're right. If you're traveling all the time, life becomes unfun and you miss out on too much. So you have to find that right number for you. And what that means is once you find your right number, then you have to get good enough to charge enough for each of those X number of talks to make a living. And that's what I did. That year I had like 60. I did a big spreadsheet and I said, well, if I keep doing 60 a year at this rate, I can barely pay the bills. That meant I had to get better. And that's what I invested in working with you and other great coaches to improve my storytelling, to improve my content so that I could get those higher fees and make a living speaking the 40 times a year that I wanted to speak.
Now let's talk a little bit about taking that story to the next level. Because I remember, I still remember, even though it was way back, well, you and I are kind of agreeing it might have been 2008.
Right.
And today it's 2023. So that was a long time ago. But you came to me in my story theater retreat with a fully formed story that you knew was like, this is a good story. People are asking for me to tell this story. And it's a compelling story. I mean, my God, climbing, Mount Rainier and falling through an ice bridge and almost dying and your partner dying. It's like, wow, this is a crucible story. This is powerful stuff. They could make a movie out of this. So you came to me with powerful material. Why did you feel that it needed to go to the next level? What did you feel that was missing? Had you seen someone else do a story at a different level and you thought, oh my gosh, my story is good, but that story is amazing? What compelled you to feel the need to go to that next level?
Yeah, it was a convergence of things that you just kind of hit, which was I was working as a paid speaker. I was full time and maybe not, hitting the big fees or anything or the big audience, but doing fine with it. But my background was working against me. I was a scientist and I came from the world of sharing data and knowledge. And if I share my data at the end, if you believe each of my data points, you should believe my conclusion. And so as a result, maybe my storytelling was a little flat and a little non-emotional. It was still a powerful story with a powerful message, but it wasn't delivered in its best way possible. I saw other speakers with more experience than me who would give these flamboyant events. I felt like I was in the story with them. I was excited to hear. And sometimes I realized that they were about being in an airport or a grocery store. And I thought, I'm missing something. If people can tell exciting, funny, powerfully emotional stories about being in airports and grocery stores, I should be able to do better with my story of being in these crazy mountains and climbing for my life, out of a glacial crevasse. And I'd seen you give some presentations and I saw you do powerful storytelling, even with sort of small stories in life. And I thought, wow, that's the way I should be doing this. In short, I'm also a writer. I've written 2 books. And in writing, we would say what I was doing was I was telling, not showing. And so I knew that I needed to learn how to show a story to bring it to life so that I was in the story and they would come in the story with me. And I thought that was going to be the key to make me a better storyteller and a better speaker.
So what I'm hearing from you is the difference between telling a compelling story, which is good, but it can be a little bit flat.
Right.
It can be a little bit like I'm standing outside of the story talking about something that happened to me a long time ago that was very dramatic, rather than taking you with me onto the mountain.
Right.
Rather
Absolutely.
than bringing you into it, what I call in moments, the story theater methodology. So you wanted to be a little bit more theatrical, and you wanted to be able to go to this next level of engagement with your audience. But what I'm hearing from you is you come from a technical background. So what wasn't natural for you with your own instincts to be theatrical, to be more flamboyant. But when you worked with me, I remember very clearly, all we had to do was give you permission and show you a few technical things in terms of adding volume or space or drama or emotion in order for it to evolve, in order for it to show up at another level. But you had the ability. Am I correct?
Well, you needed to pull it out of me. I remember distinctly too. In particular, I remember the moment in my story where I was starting to plummet through this weak ice bridge, a snow bridge, and I was falling into this dark crevasse and starting to accelerate into the darkness to fall an unknown depth inside the glacier. And I told it like a scientist, flat and very factual and everything. And you were like, stop, hold on. This is an incredible crucible moment, Jim. You've got to put it on the stage. You've got to show us what's happening, bring us into it. And so you were trying to get me to be more emotive, more energetic, more powerful. And I was reluctant. I was dragging my feet. You had to make me do it 2 or 3 times. And then you said, let me try it. You did this incredibly powerful, emotional thing. And I said, I can't do that. And you're like, all right, let's find the middle ground here. But you made me go at it until I was willing to basically to be vulnerable and to be powerful and dramatic and bring it to life. But that's what brought the story and the power and the emotion into the story as versus my old flat telling. So yes, you needed to drag it out of me and give me permission that not only is it's okay, it's better for the story, it's more powerful for the learning, and it's better for the audience.
And better for the audience becomes higher fees and
Right.
more referrals.
Right.
And an acceleration of your speaking career.
Absolutely, because they remembered the story. They probably didn't remember the third bullet out of the 5 I tried to give them in my old scientific days, but they would go, remember that guy? He fell in the crevasse and he talked about hanging on the ice wall and thinking about his friend and how it powered him up the ice wall. They remembered that, and thus they remembered me. And I still occasionally get callbacks from old clients and audience members where they say they've held on to my little postcard with another thing I learned from you, Doug, the phrase that pays. And I handed out postcards with my phrase, and they say, I've kept this card in my truck. One of them was a truck driver for 6 years, and I just gave it to my boss, and they're going to call you and bring you to a conference. I've had people write me years later. Not every audience member, but I get these comments regularly because they remember the story, how it felt, and thus the lesson, the phrase that pays, in your words, had stuck with them all those years later.
So what is the phrase that pays?
Well, it's shifted over time. It has shifted over time.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Recently I've been talking about that hardship builds hardiness, because we've all been through so much difficulty in the last few years, pandemics, economic warfare, uncertainty. And I've got other phrases in there too. I play different ones to different audiences, but they all stem from the story. So I just unfold a story. I show pictures and videos. I wave my climbing ice axes on stage, and I get to that last little distillation. And when I usually give 2 or 3 per talk. I see people take pictures of my images with their cameras. They're scribbling on the postcard. So it changes with the audience and in my career. But the main point is to know what phrase you're shooting for and then bring it to life with your stories. That's what I learned by working with you so many years ago.
Now, one of the things that I talk about that some people get a little squeamish about is being able to replicate the story pretty much the same way every time. Because if somebody sees you at a conference and they go, oh my gosh, I love that. That was amazing. Jim Davidson is incredible. I love that story. I want to recommend him for another conference. In my mind, they want the same story. They want what they saw. They want the same speech. Now, not word for word, but they want what they saw. Now, my question for you is, you've been telling this story forever, all of these different times and all these different audiences.
Right.
How close to 100% is that story each time? Is it like 70%, 80%, 90%?
I would say it's 70 or 80% the same each time, because I think of it as milestones, that I have got to hit these 6 milestones, let's say in this 30-minute story. And those 6 milestones have got to be in the story, because those are the powerful moments. That's where I watch the audience go completely wide-eyed, stunned, or a lot of my clients say you could have heard a pin drop when you told that part of the story. And so those are always in there. In between, I might wander a bit, I might customize a bit, I might stop depending on the audience and the time. But those crucial milestones, those key moments, have to be in there. And I was a little hesitant too, Doug, when you told me that you got to hit those every time. I wasn't sure until my clients verified what you taught me, which is by accident. I caught one of them on video one day. I put that in my demo video. And for about 3 years, clients would say, hey, Jim, I watched your video. Can you make sure that you please do that thing with the ice screws when you drop it on stage and you say, these are the resources that I wanted. Boom, and I dropped the ice screws. But this is all I had. And I hold up a small number of ice screws and talk about doing the best you can with what you have. Clients were requesting that moment because they saw it in the demo video. I didn't even know it was such a big moment. So my audience had to prove to me through request that, yes, those key moments are crucial, and they're still in my story today now, over 20 years later.
Yeah, one of the points that I've made to many people is people are going to hire you based on video. They're going to see a video of you on your website or on YouTube or somewhere. They're going to watch a video, and they're going to hire you based on that video, and they don't want some crappy, sloppy version of it. They want what they saw. And so we, if we're going to be called professional speakers, need to be able to replicate the story, not 100% word for word, because we're not robots. We're alive in front of an audience, but we can't go wandering all over the place with our story and delete important things, because they're going to come up and say, but Jim, you missed that one moment in the story that I hired you for. I love that moment. I actually told my meeting planner that you were going to tell that story, and there was this one moment, and you forgot that moment. Right. And then you realize, oh my God, they are so attentive to every detail of my story because they want that story the way they saw it. Now, how has your keynote evolved over all these years? Because as we tell it, as we learn, as we interact with different audiences with different needs, we learn that there are different things that we can do, parts of our speech that we can remove, other things that we can add, new stories that come along as we evolve in our life. Tell me a little bit about the evolution of your keynote.
Yeah, thanks. It does evolve slowly, and some of the things evolved because I did something on stage and it worked well in the moment, and I got a strong response, and I went, "Ooh, try to remember that. That's a good one." I tried to script some humor, and I got polite chuckles from the scripted humor, but I'm not a comedian. And these days, all the funniest moments of my speeches came to me organically on a stage somewhere. I said something, I did something, the audience roared, and most of the time I'd be smart enough to write it down. And those are now my best and funniest little moments, little quirks I do, little self-deprecating jokes I make, but they all came organically out of me after being on stage 200, 400 times, 600 times. And now I know they belong there. And those are also milestones that I hit along the way. And sometimes I'll take one out. But I also learned the importance as a professional speaker, like you say, we unpack these stories in the lessons, and we have to repack them in an appropriate closing of the story and closing of our keynote. And one time I ran a little short of time, and I was telling this rescue story about being up on Denali or Mount McKinley, and I ran out of time, and I was like, well, I don't have time to tell you how it closed. The audience, some people stood up and they were like, wait a minute. They were angry and felt ripped off that I was going to leave them on the mountain in the middle of this rescue and not explain how we got the patient down and how me and my friends got off the mountain in a storm. And I thought, whoo, boy, they just called me on it. If I have to be responsible enough to close the story down in the time given, so it's a neat package, they can walk away with this little rescue story they heard about Jim and the lesson. So it took a while for all that. So it caused my presentation to evolve, where I've got different components I can add and subtract based upon time. And more importantly, these days, about interviewing the client, who's going to be in the room, what do they need to hear from me, and I'll add, subtract components appropriately, but to make sure we tie it up with a nice bow by the time we get to the end of 0 minutes left.
Have you become calmer and more grounded and more brave in front of an audience than you were years and years and years ago? Is there something that happens along the way where all of a sudden you just settle into yourself in front of an audience and you don't feel like you need to rush? You don't feel that sense of, I'm not going to call it panic, but that little sense of anxiety that's there at the beginning. Have you noticed how calm you are now in front of an audience?
Yes, and that takes years, maybe even a decade or more to get to. And I had my nervous times, and I'd be standing backstage going, breathing hard and trying to remember what my mantra was. And I couldn't remember my mantra, which made me panic worse. All that kind of stuff. I did that for sure, as a lot of people do. And I think, but I'm past that now. I can sort of trust myself on the stage. And I think, like any professional, a good nurse, a good lawyer, a good geologist, you kind of sense that confidence due to their experience. I think clients feel that now when they talk to me on the phone, when they're still trying to decide between speaker A or B or me. And when we have that pre-event call and I'm learning about them and their audience, I think they feel that, and then they're calmer. And if we get up there and if we lose 5 minutes, gain 5 minutes, I can roll with that. And I know you and the other speakers have been at this as long. We all have this long laundry list of micro disasters that happen on stage. Smoke alarms and jackhammers and lights out and bad mics. Been through dozens of those things. And you know what? Somehow I survived, got the main point across. The audience probably laughed along with me. And so as a result, if you go, Jim, halfway through, some electronic failure is going to happen. I'll be like, okay, seen that before. We'll just bridge that when we get there. So that confidence does come, but only after hundreds of presentations. And yes, I think it keeps me calmer, the audience calmer, the client calmer.
It's not an it's people think of professional speaking as this, well, I get up there and I speak and I get paid and I go home, and it's always different. It's always unique. It's always a challenge. It's a business. It's a profession, but it's also a piece of theater. Would you agree? It's a piece of theater that you develop.
Absolutely. I think of the word performance, but performance theater, they're interchangeable in this setting for sure. It took me a long time to accept that. And I'm a scientist. My background before that, working for my dad, was a construction worker. And in science and in construction, nobody gives a hoot about what you say you can do. Let's see what you can do. So I felt at first like I'm not a performer. I'm not a trained improv person or an artist of any kind. But over a long time, I slowly realized I'm getting paid to get up there and perform this presentation, including the messaging. That's the takeaway, which is very critical. As you taught me, the phrase that pays, it can change, but you've got to give them that piece of information to take away to make it worth their time and money. So yes, it is performance art. It is theater. There's a little room for improv. There's room for audience interaction and mutual learning, us from them as much as them from us. But yes, we're getting paid to get up there and not just to go, I forgot, what was I going to say again? No, that's completely unacceptable. You should have a plan and implement that plan despite whatever little glitches may happen while you're on the stage. And I think of speaking, everything we're talking about, marketing, quality of presentation, quality of your video, as an ever rising and expanding spiral. Because my first year as a speaker, I thought, I need to improve my stage skills. I need to improve my video, my website, my marketing. And how do I do all that? How do I work on them? And I got myself into a little bit of a panic over it until I talked to somebody else that was 15 years ahead of me. And they said, oh, I'm working on my content and my stage skills and my video and my marketing. And I realized that 15 or 18 years from now, that'll be me. And here I am, 18, 20 years down the line, and I'm still working to improve all those. But it's an ever upward, broader spiral. How can I do a better job, reach more people, give more helpful content? And that's, again, the mark of a professional. We just don't rest on our laurels. We're still expanding and improving all of those basic pillars of our business.
So here's a question that many people have, and that's how do you get hired? Who hires you? How did you figure out how to market and sell yourself? So as you've evolved, at the beginning, there was a process of marketing and networking and calling people and asking for people. How is it working now? Are you getting business directly through referrals, most of it? Are you working through speakers bureaus? What is that process like now? And if you're willing to do it, share with us what are you getting paid now?
Yeah, there is a series of phases for the marketing, and it's a little different for most people. Mine is probably the sort of classic track. First, I went to people that I knew, people who were running scientific conferences, but I ran out of contacts. I had to develop more. So I joined meeting industry associations, which I think are a great way to not only meet more potential clients, but to understand that we as speakers are a small part of every meeting. The meetings, let's say 2 days, you're the opening keynote for an hour, I'm the closing keynote for an hour. We're only 1%, 5% of that conference. What's going on the other 95% of the time? How do we fit in to the big picture? So it's important to join those those meeting industry associations for that reason as well. So I kind of marketed myself to meeting planners for years at associations here in my home state, speakers bureau, not so speaker bureaus, travel bureaus, convention centers, so that when their clients came to town, they go, hey, we need a speaker about, perseverance and resilience. They go, oh, I know a guy. Or it's in Colorado. We'd like to have a mountain climber. I know a guy. His name's Jim. So it was meeting planners for probably another 5 or 7 years. Referrals slowly increased then. People would come back and say, hey, I saw you at the old conference. We're having a different conference. I put your name in the hat, Jim. I appreciate that. And now I'm at the point where I work more with a variety of speaker bureaus, and I've actually narrowed a little bit. I do most of my work through one speaker bureau, but those other speaker bureaus still come back to me because I've done dozens of jobs for them in the past. So now it's mostly through speaker bureaus, and the people hiring me are the executives, which is nice because they have the authority and the budget of VPs and CEOs and things like that. But again, it took me 18 years to get here and 800 talks behind me till I got to this point. So there's don't you always want to keep your eye on where you're going to that next level of marketing and get there, but just wherever you're at, work it hard. If you're reaching out, if you're meeting planners, that's great. But just keep your eye on over time, how can I take it to the next level, more authority, bigger audiences, bigger fees. And you asked the question what I'm getting these days. It varies a little bit with geography and length of talk, but anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 for a keynote of usually about an hour in length.
Wow, that's quite the evolution. It's nice to know that you've been able to move it up to that level. Now, and one of the things that I realized along the way, nobody is going to increase your fees until you increase your fees. Would you agree with that? You've got to give yourself a raise.
Absolutely. And you have to be worthy of that raise. And that's what I was talking earlier about, that spiral. And you were part of the help of me upping my game on stage, which is, maybe let's say when I went to see you, let's say I was a $2,000 speaker and I dreamed of becoming a $3,000 speaker. I had to up my capacity up front with my professionalism and my systems, and I had to deliver on stage. Because I might trick somebody into paying me a higher fee, but if I can't deliver at that level, they're not going to give me a recommendation. I'm not going to get more jobs at that lucky level I stumbled across. So that's when I said, I've got to up my performance as part of one of those pillars. And that's why I went to see you. And that's exactly what I got out of it, which is what I hoped, so that I could be better on stage and people would go, wow, he was great. Let's get him to somebody else. So yeah, it's that upping of all those things, your systems and your delivery.
So for the people listening to this thinking, well, I want to be a professional speaker. People have come up to me after presentations and said, oh my gosh, you're really good. You should be a pro. You should start charging for this. What would you say to them about how do you get that momentum going? And how do you start to get those contacts at the beginning and then evolving forward? What are some of those marketing tips, promotion tips, self-esteem tips? What are the things that you would say to somebody who thinks, I can do this, but I'm not sure I know how?
Great. If people have said to you, wow, you should do that again, or I'd like to have you come to my group and do that, do you charge a fee for that? Have the confidence to grab that opportunity and to charge a fee. And if they ask you, you don't have to give them an answer right then. In fact, you're probably better off to go, let me check my schedule and I'll call you tomorrow, and then go home and think about it. And then check with your colleagues and your speaking peers and ask what's a reasonable fee for this kind of an audience, and then call them. So be brave, take those opportunities, and be willing to work and improve your skills by taking great classes like you offer, Doug, and all the materials you have. And there's lots of other coaches in other areas of our business. But also early on, get those names. I look back and realize I made mistakes sometime, and I'd be like, here, I'd give my card to them and wait for them to call me. Make sure you get their card and you call them, because that's what a professional does. We follow up. We give them materials to say, here, let me make it easy for you and your boss to decide to hire me. Here's the link to my short video that I do. That means you're going to have to make investments in your own skills, your website, your video. You're going to have to make those investments. But again, that's what a professional does. And you need to slowly spiral upward. And like you said, be willing to give yourself permission to ask for that raise, ask for that next fee up, and be ready to deliver with your professionalism and your performance.
Now, one of the themes that has been throughout this is professional development, is hiring coaches, hiring consultants, networking with people who are at another level than you are. What would you suggest to people? And I'm no longer doing story theater retreats, so I don't want people to think that they could call me up and attend a story theater retreat. I do all of my coaching now, just like this, virtual coaching through Zoom with people all over the world. What would you say to them about investing in professional development?
It's absolutely critical, whatever field you're in, geology, nursing, or professional speaking. We all know that. That's why we have all these resources, is we all need them. Nobody's above learning, no matter how many years or decades they're doing it. And I have always found it worth it to invest in that kind of training. That's why I've done it over and over again over the course of my 18 or 20-year speaking career. And this, we have this Zoom tool now. It's fantastic. And so it's really great when you take those, not just a 1 hour or 2 hour session, but even more than that, so that your coach or your trainer gets to know you, your content, your messaging, because they can really personalize it and bring you up to that next level. So I think it's great you're doing it through Zoom. Retreats are great too, if other people can find them. But you've got to always be investing in that, because otherwise your advancement will stagnate. And then you kind of get this kind of stagnation feeling starts to get inside you. And I think it also gets inside your presentation, your performance. I've seen that once or twice with myself. I was tired. I had other things in my life. And I go, what am I doing? I just kind of walked through the last three. I need to kind of to wake up here a little bit. And so that's when training can wake you up and get you excited again. And again, that energy gets into your talk and makes it better for the audience.
Well, Jim, this has been very, very helpful to my listeners on storytelling that sticks for business and life. I think people are looking for just to hear from people like you who have worked it, evolved it, grown it, and moved to a place where you can get $10,000 to $20,000 a speech. And that it takes time, it takes effort, it's an evolution, and it doesn't just happen overnight. So thank you for spending the time with us. Are there any last comments that come to mind that you'd like to share with people about their belief and their ability to become a professional speaker or to up their game?
Well, yeah, it ties in. I wanted to thank you for being an important part of giving me both skills and the permission to be on stage and do what I do in a bigger, bolder way. And that I want to kind of paraphrase that and put it back. Doug, what you taught me was to have the courage to stand up there and be bold, be emotional, be vulnerable, and to really give my best showing of the story, not just telling it in a distant way. And really what that enabled me to do is be me, but be a bigger version of me. And that's something you taught me from the theater side, was to play it to the back of the room, do it proudly, do it boldly. And by being a bigger version of me, that allows me to give more to the audience and hopefully have a longer impact. So to all of the listeners out there, thanks for giving me an opportunity to share some words with them, Doug. And to them, I just say, be you, but be bigger. That's going to be your path to success.
I love that. Be you, but be bigger, because it doesn't mean you're sacrificing anything of you or being false at all. It just means this is me. I'm just turning up the volume. I'm just turning out the light. I'm just increasing the intensity a little bit. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, and continue to carry on and inspire your audiences.
Thanks so much, Doug. And thanks for all the help over the years.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, that's it for this episode. If you feel that you learned something valuable today, something that you can use that will make your stories stick, stories that make you and your business memorable, marketable, and monetizable, there are 3 things I'd like you to do. First, click on the follow or subscribe button and leave a review wherever you listen. And second, share this podcast with your friends and coworkers, your email list, and on social media. And third, connect with me on LinkedIn. And when you're ready to get serious about taking your stories to the next level, or if you have an important speech, presentation, or TED Talk coming up, or if you want some guidance on how to make the transition to becoming a professional speaker, let's schedule your free 30-minute coaching session where we can get to know each other and see if we're a good fit. And as always, I'd love to hear from you with your questions and comments. Let me know that you're out there listening and learning. You can send an email with your questions, comments, and suggestions to Deborah@DougStevenson.com. That's Deborah, DEBORAH, @DougStevenson.com. Hey, thanks for listening. Until the next episode, I'm Doug Stevenson.